everybody, and welcome to today's Sustainable Communities webinar, where we're going to talk about building enthusiasm for sustainability. I'm Kathy Kuntz, the Executive Director of Cool Choices, and I'm delighted you could join me today to talk about building enthusiasm and expanding momentum for sustainability. It seems really appropriate we're talking about this topic this week, given the IPCC report that came out earlier this week that said so clearly what we all need to do, communities, governments, businesses, individuals, is sort of expand who's acting and get everyone to do much more. My sort of key summary of this: engage everybody, do everything. When I was thinking about this webinar first, I wanted to kind of create some context around why it's so important to build that broader base of enthusiasm, why it's important to engage everyone. Now, I think the IPCC has sort of given us a context for that, but I'm going to give you sort of my own personal context here a little bit, give you a sense of how I came from being more of a kind of traditional energy efficiency professional to someone who's really obsessed with engagement and behavior change. And really, it all goes back to a series of reports that the Wisconsin Energy Bureau used to issue. So the Energy Bureau used to do this annual energy statistics guide, and one of the things in the statistics guide was this fun graph of the average electric usage of residential appliances. So it showed the usage of a brand new appliance back in 1972 and all the way up to the present at that point, about 2011. To get a sense of how this works, we look at this dark dotted line as an example. So in 1972, a new refrigerator on average used 1,700 kilowatt hours a year. By 2010, that was down to 500 kilowatt hours a year. So part of what I loved about the energy statistics, to be sure, was there was data like this that so affirmed kind of the technological progress we were making relative to energy efficiency. We'd taken these appliances and made them so much more energy efficient over time without compromising quality or performance in any way. So, I would get the new energy reports and look at this data and go, that feels really good. And then I would keep flipping through, and a couple of pages later, I'd see this graph. So this graph is the average electric consumption of a Wisconsin home. So whereas those individual appliances were using less and less electricity over time, our homes were using more and more. There's this way that the one graph was going downward while the other graph went upward. And of course, if you think about that, you can think about why that's the case. In 1972, homes had relatively few electric appliances. Most homes had at most one TV that did not have a remote at all, so when it was turned off, it was turned off. A refrigerator, a couple of other electric appliances, that was it. There weren't DVRs, there weren't game consoles, there certainly, there weren't remotes to all of these things, so our total electric consumption was quite a bit lower. And there's a similar way that increasingly electric use is disaggregated in commercial buildings and across communities too. So research in Minnesota indicates that when you look at a high-performance building, by which we mean a building with an efficient shell, with high-efficiency lighting, heating, and cooling systems in it. So we're sort of managing all of those big systems. 55% of the total energy used in that building is plug load. Now, when we think about building energy usage, historically, we've thought about things that facility managers can control. The lighting system, the heating, the ventilation. A facility manager can't control plug load. That's about the number of monitors on everyone's desk, how many people are, leaving 2 or 3 big monitors on, sometimes 24/7, space heaters, refrigerators, coffee makers, all the stuff that people accumulate in their offices and cubicles. And it really speaks to this issue of kind of building and broadening enthusiasm, because it's when you've got those initial goals, a green team, a solid facilities team can accomplish a lot around efficiency and sustainability. But as you get into those aggressive goals, when you're talking about a high performance building where more than half of the remaining energy use is everyone, you need to engage everyone. As one of our favorite past partners put it, you need an entire employee population. You need an entire city population moving in the same direction. And that's why you need to build enthusiasm. You need to build that bigger engagement, because to achieve the aggressive goals we need to achieve forward, it's not enough that you have the most amazing green team you've ever had. And I've talked to some of you. You have amazing green teams. You have a small cohort of citizens in your community who are completely committed. The quest now is to get everyone else engaged too, because the only way you can accomplish these aggressive goals is if all hands are on deck. And so we start thinking about, well, how do we bring everyone into the conversation? And that group of folks who are already engaged tends toward information first. Well, we'll just tell them how cool this all is, how much they want them. We'll tell them what we want them to do. Sometimes in conversations with communities, I can't help but kind of envision this, that there's, a big billboard on the edge of your town that says, think of the future, reduce your carbon footprint. Maybe there's a little parking lot over here where the intent is that people abandon their automobiles and come into the community and use less energy and are completely transformed because they got that information that they should, which is pretty unrealistic. As I'm painting that picture, you're thinking, yeah, right, Kathy, that won't work. Except I would point out to you that in a myriad of circumstances, we still presume that information is sufficient to change behaviors, to engage people. That if we let people know that an apple has fewer calories than a brownie, they'll always choose the apple. And we know that's not really the case, but we tend to kind of fall into that habit of doing that. So I think maybe if you've done a webinar with me before, you might well have seen this slide before, because I use this image a lot. When I want to think about who my target audience is, who I need to become enthusiastic about sustainability in a community, I think about these guys. These are well-intentioned guys who want to do the right thing. They know exercise is good for them, and that's why they're taking the escalator to the gym. Okay, they're not connecting all the dots I want them to connect, but their hearts are in the right place. And so, my quest is, how do I effectively engage them? And part of that is understanding where they're at, where we're all at in this moment. And we're all in a place where our time and attention is being pulled in a million directions, where we've got enormous work responsibilities, we're balancing with family responsibilities, we're balancing with our interests. We might be pursuing a part-time degree while we're also trying to make sure the kids get to soccer and someone remembers to feed the dog. And when was that report due? It's all these things we're juggling all the time. And it's really important to think about, okay, the people you want to bring into this conversation, the people you want to have be enthusiastic and part of the solution in your community are already overextended in a number of ways. And so really coming to that with a sense of, okay, how do we do this? You know, here are cool choices we think that a key to engaging them and being successful is that we make it fun, social, and easy, sort of our shorthand for this. So it's pleasant, there's evidence that your peers are doing things, and we've removed some of the friction. We've made it less hard. Now, I want to kind of talk through this a little bit today, because all of these aren't really that easy or intuitive when you think about the kinds of things we want to do. The very first time someone introduced me to the concept of fun, social, and easy, these are the kind of images I had in my head. Right, I'm going to convince someone that setting a thermostat is fun. In what universe? How am I ever going to do that? And you know, part of the answer is that things are fun when there are unexpected rewards, when things surprise you in some way, when there's a layer of entertainment you didn't expect to have. The best example I can give you is piano stairs. So I'm not going to play videos today given our limited time, but if you go to Google and go to YouTube and search for piano stairs, you'll get the Volkswagen actually did this experiment in Stockholm. And it turns out that if you make the staircase in a metro stop musical, so that when people go up and down it, they're playing music, you can get a 60+% shift in people using the stairs versus the escalator. So a huge public health benefit, because it's fun to take them then. So thinking about, you know, the analogy maybe in your world is, how do you catch people doing the right things and reward them? So you're at a community meeting and you're talking about how we want to encourage people to bike short distances. Who in the room has used their bike to go to the grocery store in the last month? Show of hands. Everyone who raises their hand gets a treat. That makes me feel good. It makes me feel like it's fun to do these things in my community. And then there's social. So the longer I do this work, the more important social is and the more challenging I think it is. You know, certainly initially I thought fun and easy were where there was a struggle if you were trying to encourage people to adopt new practices. But social is really kind of tricky in a way that's unexpected. So an awful lot of what we as individuals do to be sustainable, we do in ways that nobody else sees. So nobody knows if I turn off the water when I brush my teeth, because none of you are in my house with me. You don't know if I turn off my monitors when I leave my office, because people don't typically come in and check my office for that. You know, there are all these things that we do that nobody sees us do. And that's really important, because as human beings, a ton of our activities are based on the cues we see from other people. So if I can't see your cues, they're not helping me do the right thing. And again, here, there's some great YouTube examples of how powerful social cues are. My own personal favorites tend to be old Candid Camera episodes. So again, if you search Candid Camera, peer norms or social norms, you'll get a ton of these episodes. In this particular one, people come into the elevator facing backward and they get the unsuspecting targets to turn backward in an elevator in the course of a couple of flights, because it's uncomfortable to not do what other people are doing. So the way to think about this in the sustainability world is, how do you make it more visible that some people are recycling and composting appropriately? Do help them provide cues to other people about what to do. The last piece, of course, is easy. And, this chart is the average carbon footprint of a household in the U.S. And, there's a million things there and a lot to think about, and it's kind of overwhelming. And so thinking about how do you give people simple, concrete actions? How do you help them prioritize what are the important things for me to do right now? What are the next important things for me to do? In one of the other webinars in this series, we talked a lot about choice architecture and how you frame things so that it's easier for people to do the right thing. Incredibly important to give people that kind of easy path forward. So I want to give you a couple of examples of applying these things and then kind of open it up for questions. And I like to kind of pull examples from different sustainability arenas. So let's talk transportation first. So transportation is a really terrific example of where you can make change visible, where you can create social cues. So can you create examples in your community? Are there leading citizens, prominent opinion leaders who can model the behaviors that you want more people to adopt? Whether that's biking or using public transit or carpooling, the more people can see people that they admire doing those things, the more effective that's going to be. It's also a good place to think about fun and easy, though. We've been doing work in some communities lately where we're hearing from residents that particular bike routes or walking routes don't feel safe. There's not a dedicated bike lane on this particular road, and cars are going really fast. It doesn't feel safe. Well, no one is going to define it as fun if it feels like I'm taking my life in my hands every time I ride my bike. And that's not something, it's easy for me to think about my children doing. So thinking about kind of all of the ways those things fit together to influence what you want to have happen around transportation. Similarly, if we think about buildings, I always like to talk about the power of benchmarking for buildings. So giving building owners, whether we're talking homeowners or commercial buildings or the tenants of those buildings, a way to understand their energy usage. How does my usage compare to other similar businesses? Because if I'm using twice as much energy in my business as the offices down the road, that doesn't make much sense. That's not really contributing to what I'm trying to accomplish here. And so thinking about how certainly Energy Star Portfolio Manager, but other kinds of tools can help people understand how does my usage compare. Now, a really important point here, thinking about the fun part, that we want sustainability to be a pleasant thing that people want to do more of. The aim in benchmarking should be to identify publicly leaders who others can emulate. You want everyone to get their feedback, but you never want to create a situation where the public aim is to shame the entities that are underperforming, in this case, using more energy. And fundamentally, I'd say you don't want to shame them because there's absolutely no research evidence that shaming in a public way works. Now, there is evidence that if I tell you, wow, you use twice as much energy as everyone else, that may well motivate you to change what's happening in your building, but we don't need everybody pointing at you for you to be motivated about that. You having that information is enough. Really, the aim of the city government, the community-based organization, should be to celebrate the leaders. Because as you celebrate those leaders, you reinforce what they're doing, make them want to do more, and you also create a cohort that wants to be the next folks you celebrate. Much better way to think about kind of the benchmarking. And you know, we talk a lot about benchmarking where we're comparing you to other entities, but there's also interesting benchmarking that can happen where we're just comparing you to yourself. So this is my own water usage. So my water utility here in Madison, Wisconsin, we have smart meters, and I can log on to a site where I can see my water usage on a daily basis. And I can think about, oh, you know, the days when, in fact, 2 years ago, shortly after this system went into place, we bought a new dishwasher because I suddenly saw clear evidence of how inefficient our dishwasher was. You can't even see our new dishwasher in our data. It's so water efficient compared to the old one. So, you know, the ways of thinking about, so what the utility did is it made it easier for me to understand what was going on in my house so that I could make better choices. Another piece of easy, and we talked about this a bit in the choice architecture, is how many options you give people. You know, if you're going to offer people, here are some priorities for what you could do. 3 tips is a good number of tips to give people. 3 tips that are going to apply to me. Giving me a list of 100 things where 72 of them might apply to me, but that depends, and I have to figure all of that out. And there are 28 that don't apply at all, and I don't even know why I read them, is just going to make me tired. And I'm probably not going to do anything because the list was overwhelming. So really always, you know, I think we all have to be so ruthless about how do we make this easy for people? How do we give them just the information they need when they need it in a way that they can act upon it? Those guys on the escalator have an awful lot to do. They're thinking about a million different things. Let's make it easy for them to do the right thing. The final kind of example here to think about, and here we have it with recycling, but you know, it can really apply across everything, is really thinking about, you know, one way to make all of these topics fun is to engage school children in investigating how things work in your community, in encouraging green practices in your community, in celebrating the good things that are happening in the community. You know, there's a way that, particularly as we think about sustainability and the legacies we're creating for the future, to really be mindful about, okay, how do we introduce that kind of, you know, kid element that can often make this more fun. It can grab some more attention. It can bring all of this together in a more fun way. Finally, in this particular one, I want to kind of suggest some additional resources to you. This is sort of my set of the books that I think are most helpful in terms of thinking about human behavior and how to influence human behavior. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, Switch by Chip Heath and Dan Heath, Influence by Robert Cialdini, and Predictably Irrational by Dan Averly. In addition, at the bottom, I put a link to the BECC conference. So that's the Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change Conference. And if you're not familiar with BEC, I would encourage you to check out their website. There's an enormous amount of resources there, including examples from other communities about how they're engaging people around sustainability. I think all of that can be useful as you're thinking about how to build enthusiasm in your own community. And with that, I want to close things. I want to give us a couple minutes for questions. Remind you that this webinar is one of a series of 4 webinars we've done, really targeting communities and what communities can do to engage and accelerate sustainability in their communities, and then to remind you also that communities in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa are eligible to get deeply subsidized consulting from us in conjunction with this series. So if you've got a particularly wicked problem you've been coping with, reach out and we're glad to sit down and help you talk through what's happening and where some behavioral principles might apply. And with that, I want to open it up to questions. So there in your little sidebar box, there's the opportunity to ask a question. It looks like we have one. I talked about opinion leaders in the community being great examples, but in our community, they're not engaged. They're not walking the talk. How do we motivate them? And I think a piece of that can be being really clear with them about how much their behavior signals to other people what they should be doing. So the way I approach that sometimes is go, okay, when I go around this community and ask people kind of about, well, whose opinion do you defer to on that, or who's the leader on that? Your name comes up all the time. We want to inspire people to bike more in our community. I think it would be tremendously influential if people could see you biking. What could we do to have, I'm not saying you have to bike to work every day, Mr. Mayor, but maybe there's some moments where you use one of our, bike rentals as a way to signal to people that you are doing this too. I just think it would be tremendously influential out there in the community. So that's the way I would frame that. And certainly to give the mayor a little ego stroke. It's true. People are telling me they're watching him. I need him to help us by being that example we want him to be. Figuring out a way for that to be a successful thing for him as well as you. The thing I think about there. We do not have more questions, and we're almost straight up at 12:30. It's always important to me that we end these webinars on time. The one other thing I'm going to note, though, is I just sent you all a link to a short survey, and we'll send that out via email too, that just a couple of questions about the webinars to get your feedback. I'd love if you could take a minute and fill that out. Otherwise, as always, thanks for everything you're doing to promote sustainability in your community. We're all grateful for your work, and we'd love to help in any way we can. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much for joining me today. Bye.